What say you to Keir Starmer's comments that he's ready for a general election win?
Well, there's no denying that it was a pretty good night for Labour. It was certainly a very bad night for the Conservatives. They were, in the run-up to the local elections, CCHQ was saying that the party could lose up to 1,000 seats, but it was widely believed across Westminster that that was simply expectation management and they were more likely to lose around 600. In the end, they did lose 1,000. They lost them to pretty much every party, so it wasn't just Labour who did well out of the Conservative losses. The Lib Dems did very well as well. The Conservatives were sort of squeezed in a pincer-like effect on both sides by Labour in the north and the Lib Dems in the south. Whether it was a really good night for Labour isn't completely certain. So what Labour wanted to happen was for it to win enough council seats that if you extrapolated the pattern onto a general election prediction, it would win an outright majority. Now, that didn't quite happen. But as Labour makes clear, the local elections didn't include Scotland. So if the SNP does implode, as we're expecting at the next general election, then we could see Labour winning up to 15 to 20 seats, which would put them in outright majority territory. The bad news is for Labour that in the lead-up to a general election, in the year before a general election, you normally actually see the incumbent party win back a share of the vote. So this is about the worst time. This stage in the election cycle is the worst time for an incumbent party. We can expect, naturally, to see a bit of a shift towards the Conservatives in the year ahead. The other bad news for Labour is that although the Tories did lose an awful lot of seats, the national share of the vote wasn't quite as bad as you might expect. And the national share of the vote, rather than council seats, is more of a close predictor of what happens at a general election. But really, perhaps the worst news for Labour, of course, the main story here is that it was a good night for Labour, but these are the bad points. Another bad thing for Labour is that Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak's personal popularity ratings are neck and neck, which, given how badly the Conservatives are trailing Labour in the polls, and given the fact that the Conservatives have been in power for 13 years, isn't great news at all for Labour. And if this turns out to be a sort of popularity contest between these two well-meaning, technocratic politicians, then Labour certainly can't afford to rest on its laurels. Rishi Sunak is a pretty popular politician personally, even if his party isn't. And right before a general election, we normally see it turn into more of a personal dogfight.
Yes, and if economic conditions improve, and that's a big if inflation does come down, employment rises, people start to feel a little bit better off, they might see it as more of a risk to vote Labour when it comes to a general election. It's very easy in a local election to cast your vote against the governing party because you want to give them a little bit of a kicking. But I also find it quite interesting what's going on within the Labour Party itself, because, of course, Keir Starmer, he's let go of some of his more socialist pledges. He doesn't seem to want to nationalise everything. He doesn't want to scrap tuition fees altogether. He's moving to the centre ground, but that means that some of his support he's losing to the Greens, potentially, to more far-left parties.
Yes, he is. What we've seen from Labour in the last 6 months, really, is much less of a focus on ideology, much less of a focus on sort of policy generally. What they're doing is painting themselves, or attempting to do, I should say, is sort of painting themselves as the competent party. They will fix what's broken. And that's what they're hearing out of focus groups. It's not so much that people don't like what the Tories' pledges are. It's not that they disagree with what Rishi Sunak stands for in terms of stopping the boats, fixing the NHS, etc., all of these well-meaning Tory aims, but they just don't believe that the Conservatives are up to the job. And you can understand why after the sort of turbulent political year that the Tories have had. So what Keir Starmer is doing at the moment is trying to sort of say, well, they've had their turn, it hasn't worked, we will do something similar, but we'll do it better. So, yes, we're not seeing nearly so many of the sort of socialist policies that we saw under Jeremy Corbyn. But whether that will be enough to win them a general election without a sort of big vision for the country remains to be seen. Because what they need to do, this is the real hill to climb for Labour, because to turn around that really big majority from the 2019 general election, they need an 8-point swing in their favour. That is huge. That's more than Blair got in 97.